I'm going to applaud. Good evening. My name is Amy Freitag, and I'm so glad to welcome trust friends, donors, and grantees here tonight. And thank you all for being here to help us celebrate our 100th anniversary, our centennial year, 2024. So I want to say on behalf of our wonderful board of directors, Jamie Drake, who many of you met here this evening, and our incredible staff, many of whom are from across the region. If trust people would just wave their hands. We have the most incredible trust team. Thank you guys for being here. I also just want to thank, we have an honored guest this evening, Assembly Member Stephen Raga from the 30th Assembly District is here. Thank you, Assemblyman. So great to have you here. So we could not be more proud than to be here in Long Island City to celebrate 100 years as a community foundation serving this great borough, Manhattan, Brooklyn, the Bronx, Staten Island, Long Island, and Westchester, the 8-county region that's home to 12.4 million New Yorkers. We have been your community philanthropy partner for 100 years, and we're going to be here for the next 100 years and beyond, and that is something to celebrate. So what better place than to be here at this beautiful museum? And I want to thank the whole team here, Aziz Isham, who couldn't be with us tonight, but so many members of the team of the Museum, The Moving Image, are here to welcome us. And what a great place for us to be, because in many ways this institution just is a perfect example of how, through our incredible living donors who are so generous, through our permanent funds allowing us to make grants from our competitive grant making program, those things come together in a very powerful way, and we have been longtime partners of this institution. So whether it was for COVID relief or for youth education or for general operating support, we have been in partnership with the museum. So a big round of applause to this incredible institution. So tonight's program really, I have to say, has been a personal passion of mine since I worked at the New York City Parks Department and grappled with the important and vital mission of making the largest, most complex, and historic urban park system in the world accessible. That challenge was and remains enormous, but grounded in the most fundamental rights of justice and equity. How could we achieve what Frederick Law Olmsted envisioned for New York? Parks, playgrounds, and open spaces that are truly democratic and accessible to all. That work continues, but it really shaped me, and it really built my appreciation for the Trust's long history and commitment to accessibility work, which is the focus of our program this evening. The Trust is perhaps best known for what we do in some of our most challenging moments, like after 9/11, when we teamed up with the United Way and raised $500 million for emergency relief, or after Superstorm Sandy, or most recently in response to COVID, when we were able to bring together generous donors, foundations, to put together nearly $80 million of relief that went out in grants within weeks of the closure of the city and state. But what we may be a little less well known for is the work we do day in and day out over the past 100 years to support the communities we serve. I'd like to say there isn't an issue that we haven't addressed across 8 counties. I say we do from cats to cancer, from climate to culture. The Trust has been really working to make the city of region a healthier and more equitable and vibrant place. And all this is made possible by generations of generous donors, people with a passion for the city and region. We work with individuals, families, foundations, and businesses. I like to say that the Trust is like this crazy quilt of generosity, each patch representing an individual donor's act of generosity. And then we weave those patches together to bring support to communities in need. Our quilt includes patches contributed by cab drivers and accountants, by school teachers and bankers and entrepreneurs, everyday people who came together over the past 100 years to make New York a better place. So people like David Warfield, the most famous actor in the world in the 1920s. Think of the Leonardo DiCaprio of his day. New York was his home and his stage, and it made him a very wealthy man. But in the last decades of his life, David lost his vision, prompting him to devote the majority of his estate to a fund at the New York Community Trust in 1951 devoted to assisting people with vision loss. Fast forward to today, when the trust supports settlement houses in all parts of the city, where sometimes as many as 84% of the participants will fail their eye exam. They receive free services thanks to David Warfield's patch in our quilt. It's thanks to David that, really the trust has become one of the most recognized and one of the largest funders of disability in the region, and that's very much thanks to David Warfield. But David actually isn't our only donor who focused on making New York more accessible and welcoming. Queens College professor Deborah Elkins was a champion of women's health and established a memorial fund for her sister to provide greater access for people with visual impairment that has given hundreds of New Yorkers access to voting, employment, adaptive tools, and better transportation. Like David Warfield's fund, the Elkins patch in our quilt is also generous and permanent. And thanks to them, when we say for accessibility forever, we actually mean it. But as you've heard me say, both of those funds actually focus primarily on visual loss, on visual disability. And the truth is that to meet the needs of today, we need a next generation of David Warfields and Deborah Elkins to establish a next generation of generous funds to support the entire disabled community. This next generation of donors could drive a movement to change systems and policies to make our nonprofit community and our entire region more accessible. So this is the power of the trust. For 100 years, we provided donors and our grantees a platform for change. That's why the trust could make the very first grants for AIDS research. We are the first grants to the Highline. Our list of firsts is quite long and impressive. So who comprises that next generation of generous New Yorkers who love this place, love this region, and want to make a difference today, and ideally leave us a legacy for future generations? That is the work that lies ahead for us at the New York Community Trust. And so to celebrate our centennial, we aren't just looking back. We're boldly and ambitiously looking forward. We know there's even more we can do, even more donors we can engage, and we want to make many, many more grants because we know there is still so much work to get done. And you can help us by sharing your voice and your vision for our next century of impact. So in your program, there is a QR code. And after our program, it'd be great if you could click on that. And you will be directed for an opportunity to vote on how $3 million in grant making in 2025 can be allocated to causes that might mean the most to you. For example, like creating jobs or strengthening our democracy or helping the newest New Yorkers. We want to hear from you, and we want to hear from as many New Yorkers, so please spread the word. We'd love it if every New Yorker voted. And after your vote, you'll be invited to share your vision for how you'd like to see New York evolve for the better over the years and decades ahead. Your votes and your voice can help us shape our grant making in the years and decades ahead. So, all that, it's time to show. Tonight's panel is led by my incredible colleague, Rachel Pardo, our Senior Program Officer at the Trust, who oversees grant making for people with disabilities, older adults, animal welfare, and technical assistance for nonprofits. Rachel is well known for her outstanding grant making and for advocacy on behalf of disabled New Yorkers. I have learned so much from Rachel during my time at the Trust, and I know you will all get so much out of this evening's panel. I leave you in the best of hands, and Rachel, take it away.
Thank you, Amy. Is my mic on?
Uh-oh.
No?
Mine is.
Oh, okay, now it's on. Hi. So I am so excited to be here in Queens. I was trying to do the math back at home, and I'm a fourth generation Queens resident, and the fifth generation is in the audience tonight. So I'm really excited to feel like you're all coming to my home in arguably the best borough in New York City. Yeah. So Amy mentioned a few of our grants. I wanted to just highlight really narrowly targeted to Queens some of the work that we're doing around accessibility because it's really exciting and I'm really passionate about it. So you're here in MoMI tonight, and MoMI is actually making great strides around accessibility, and we're hoping to recommend a grant in December to help them move along and think about how to make their space more welcoming. But there's also a really cool kind of cultural corridor of institutions here in New York that are leading the charge, and that is Queens Theater, Queens Museum, New York Hall of Science. They're all kind of the leaders in thinking about how to be accessible, how to make sure that their programs are welcoming everyone, no matter their ability, no matter their language barrier, and really they're leading the charge and having conversations about how other more well-known organizations that are a little bit slower to do that. There's also a really cool culture of immigrant organizations that are thinking about kind of the next issue. So we know that a lot of immigrants are coming to New York City. Some of these organizations are now understanding that the parents have children with disabilities and they don't know how to navigate the system. Believe me, the public school system is already hard to navigate without any barriers, but then having the barrier of needing special ed and disability services, and then the language and the cultural barriers, it's almost insurmountable. So the Trust has helped these organizations really build up their capacity to provide services to parents in languages that they understand, with staff that look like them. There's also, so I should name the groups, ASHO, CETA, Project Ready, Project New Yorker, and most of those are kind of the outer areas of Queens, Eastern Queens, really helping some communities that don't get a lot of dollars, unfortunately. Some really interesting work around kind of cultural recognition and how to make sure that traditional services are targeting communities of color and communities of immigrants and people with language barriers in appropriate ways. So a really cool organization that I wanted to highlight they're called India Home, and they came to us about 5 years ago, really out of a basement of a mosque, and now they are one of the most recognized organizations. I would say Queens definitely serving older adults, but also probably the city. And they are an organization that targets services to South Asian older adults who are often coming to the country with literacy barriers, language barriers, and don't feel comfortable getting services from the traditional older adult center. And lastly, we just made a really interesting grant to a group called Common Point, and this is actually the merger of two Ys here in Queens. And they're doing a training program for young adults with disabilities to serve people with disabilities, which is really thinking about a big challenge in the disability world, that there's not enough people to kind of serve in the workforce, and now it's trying to think of a unique way of filling that gap. So I think that the work is amazing. I want to highlight the nonprofits. They're doing amazing work. But just to kind of pull back a bit about how the Trust does business, the mantra that I use in my grant making and kind of my entire career in nonprofit is nothing without us. And that's the understanding, and it's the mantra within the disability rights movement. And that's the understanding that no policies, no programs, no ideas should be developed without the people at the table that those ideas are affecting. And that's how I think about my work on a day-to-day basis. So to kind of paint you a story, in 2015, I just started at the Trust. I've been there almost 10 years. And I had coming across my desk a lot of proposals that were just paying for vans to get people to services, to get people into the doors, and which was quite funny. And they're like little pockets of money here and there, small proposals, but making up a big amount together. The challenge is that there's a program here in New York City called Access-A-Ride, and that program is supposed to serve anyone who is unable to use public transportation, may that be the bus or the subway. It serves almost 150,000 people here in New York City. It cost about $500 million, and that was in 2016, so I think it's probably significantly more now. And 70% of riders are older adults. But the problem with Access-A-Ride is anyone who's used it knows that there is a 24-hour waiting period to get a ride. They sometimes don't show up. The riders are often rude, or the drivers are often rude. The rides are long and circuitous. It takes hours to get from Queens to Manhattan. Believe me, I've been on Access-A-Ride trips. And the big issue is that for people with disabilities, without access to transportation, they don't have access to work, they don't have access to good medical care, they can't see their friends. All the things that we think of ourselves as being a New Yorker, that we have access to everything 24 hours a day, that's not the case for people with disabilities. And even bigger is I like to think of the subway system. When you're on the subway train, you kind of see people from all walks of life, all languages, all cultures, all classes, but you don't necessarily see people with disabilities because it's so hard to go on the train. And for people who are not thinking about this on a daily basis, if you don't, out of sight, out of mind, and that's a travesty. So we put together a group of, I'd say 8 organizations coming together saying, okay, we have the funding, how can we fix this? What would you envision as a way to make this work? And ultimately 4 organizations came together to build a coalition. And the coalition is funny, they call themselves ARG. You probably saw some pictures of it. And ARG is the sound people make when they think about Access-a-Ride. It's ARG exclamation. And also Access-a-Ride Reform Group. Over the course of 10 years, we gave $2 million to this group, and they've done tremendous work. Since then, now Access-a-Ride vehicles can use bus lanes, so there's some legitimacy and efficiency in place. There was driver training, there were COVID safety precautions, there's an updated mapping system, and then also there's an on-demand app. So for a select group of Access-a-Ride users, and there's advocacy to make that group larger, but for a select group, they can essentially use Access-a-Ride like an Uber. So they can call Access-a-Ride and they can come at any time. And Eman can tell whether it actually works. Yep. And now the next step is around certification so that someone with a chronic or a progressive disability doesn't need to be recertified every year. So really amazing work. And I would like to now turn it over to Eman, who is really the brain and the passion behind these efforts. She is a senior community organizer with New York Lawyers for the Public Interest and led the charge to improve Access-a-Ride and continues to lead the charge. Thank you for that. And she will share a piece about her experience as a person with a disability living in New York City.
Thank you.
So take it away.
So this is called logical fallacy, and I wrote it a few years ago when I started working again. A logical fallacy is an error in reasoning. I used to have illogical thinking about my capabilities as someone living with disabilities and my ability to have full-time work. And luckily, I realized that these illogical thoughts weren't true. I re-entered the workforce full-time again several years ago. I did some extreme freelancing, taking low-paid gigs because I was living on Social Security disability income, and my lupus was incredibly active. It still is. Since my diagnosis with lupus in 2001 when I turned 17, I was in and out of the hospital every 6 months for years. I convinced myself that I was always going to be too sick to have a full-time job like I had prior to 2010. I didn't think it was possible for someone with my medical history to have a full-time job, let alone be in school full-time, and all at the same time. I was in and out of the hospital so much that nobody even wanted to hire me. Years ago, I didn't realize that the stressful people in my life also contributed to my lupus flares going haywire. I also didn't realize that eating unhealthy foods were causing my lupus to go haywire. Not to mention not having a good healthcare team that actually cared about my quality of life over getting famous off of my weirdly aggressive lupus. Those things combined had me in a constant state of flare, which nearly killed me multiple times since I was 14. Folks wonder why I have no fear. This is why. It took me losing both legs and a knee to realize that I was living in an unsustainable way. There is no possible way I could keep living like this and make it to old age. I decided to take full charge of my life, my health, and my diet and get control of my lupus as best as I could. I had to get away from toxic people, I had to try to improve my diet, and I had to do some more research on companies and doctors that would take a chance on me. There were and are many people who still don't think someone like me is worth employing or investing in. We are apparently a liability, regardless of our talents or our potential contributions. Many of the jobs I applied to before NILPI didn't even get back to me. And when they asked questions about the gaps in my resume, I'd get ghosted and completely ignored. People in public interest law firms didn't want to hire me 4 years ago, but I've brought millions of dollars into NILPI and other organizations that I work with because of my visible disability and my very big mouth, which I love. Unfortunately, everyone isn't as lucky to be able to sort of prove that they are worthy to have a chance taken on them. And for the beginning of my life, you couldn't tell me that there was something wrong with my body. Disability rights attorney Christopher Hodgins said, "The majority of workers with disabilities who earn subminimum wage are not aware of other work or training opportunities and are often dissuaded from trying to obtain better employment. In general, the employment service system that is supposed to prepare people with disabilities for community employment is too complex and not explained well enough for them to use effectively." Even though I was aware of all kinds of jobs that I could apply for, especially with my organizing, my artistic, my community, my social media, and all the skills that I came with, I knew people wouldn't want to take a chance on me. I got lucky with NOPI, but this isn't the norm for the majority of my community. And add race, immigration, or even a level of disability that's worse than the typical disability, and you may get an even worse response. I've even been applying for new jobs and haven't gotten any replies because of the gaps in my resume. That doesn't help. And all I can do is keep being me and hope an organization will recognize that I'm just as valuable a worker as anyone. I used to think I couldn't work because I'm an amputee and I have lupus. That's a lot, especially with active lupus and newly discovered long COVID and doctor's appointments and medication. But I discovered that that was sort of ableist ways of thinking about myself, a fallacy, and therefore not completely accurate. I've managed to figure out how to have a good work life and everything else balance, or at least I try. Even when I've had to do chemo while working and meeting with elected officials, or going back to school, or having a very busy life. I just had surgery 2 weeks ago. Being a vegan helps me to be better to my body, at least sometimes. And yes, I've had a lot of trials and errors, but it's doable, and it's not impossible. It just takes the work to fight against my body trying to kill me. But with all these kinds of disabilities, people can do all kinds of work, not just menial, low-paying jobs. We have the ability to do whatever we are passionate about. Our skills, our knowledge, our drive, it's all worth it. I'm proof of that. I'm proof that taking a chance on someone is always worth it. And that thinking that we simply can't do something because of our disability is completely illogical. Thank you.
Thank you, Eman. It so resonates with me when you're listing these, kind of challenges that you're facing. And I think anyone who's outside of the disability space will say, oh, well, the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed 30 years ago. It should be fine. Like, things should be okay. Can you speak, well, first of all, in case I missed anything during my introduction, if you wanted to do a brief introduction just to fill in the gaps. So please do that. And then also, if what are the major issues, and what are the kind of the systemic challenges and barriers that are still in place that people assume shouldn't be there because there's a federal act signed 30 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm I do organizing and artwork and training and facilitation. I'm just, everything disability focused. That's what I do. So that's good enough. And if you want to talk to me after, we can talk after. So I think the issue that people don't recognize is the ADA is the floor, not the ceiling. Mm-hmm. And just because it was started 30-something years ago does not mean everything is fixed. From inaccessible schools to inaccessible hospitals to inaccessible housing, and not just physical disabilities, all kinds of disabilities. There are still issues. There are over 1 million disabled people living in New York. And as people age, when COVID came around, I started researching, immunology and how we age and the things that affect certain bodies. And so as soon as you turn 65, you're automatically compromised in your immune system. So that means that as people are aging, you're becoming a bit more vulnerable. And I've been vulnerable since I was 14, but, I digress. But, I feel like people don't think disability is their problem. They think somebody else is going to handle it. Yeah. It's you people over there, and it's like, no, we should all be sort of together as a community, helping each other grow and build our lives and make sure things are accessible. I always use the curb cut analogy, and curb cuts are incredibly great for everyone, not just for folks who use wheelchairs, but for parents with strollers, for people with luggage, for folks doing deliveries. And so the same curb cut effect on a sidewalk pertains to everything. If things are accessible for everyone, then everyone can have access to it. And that means that everyone can participate, everyone can be there. And I feel like if everyone's included and involved, it makes it, diversity makes things even better. So why not,
Yeah.
So I think that is, people don't think it's their problem, so they don't even look at it. But it is their problem because we're all aging, we're all getting older. I just happened to get diagnosed with lupus. I mean, you might get older and, break your knee, or you might, God forbid, get hit by a car or get sick, or something might happen, and then you might become disabled. And that doesn't mean that you are less than or you're weak or anything like that. That just means you're aging. And that's okay. We want you to age. I want to get old. I still want to be here, So let's look at disabilities in sort of like a strength kind of way instead of a deficiency. And I think that's why sometimes they're like, oh, man, you're not disabled. I'm like, okay, let me ask my metal legs. Let me ask my walker or my wheelchair. Let me ask my 18 medications and all of my doctors. They don't associate strength and disability.
Right.
And that's a huge problem. And I think that they should, because I'm gangster for being a metal leg lady. So, and we should all look at it that way. Like, we're all, disability's kind of gangster, and like, I love being.
You're the bionic woman.
So yeah,
Yeah, you're a superhero.
Absolutely. So
I've heard the quote that disability is the only minority group that anyone can join at any time, and then we most likely will join if you're lucky to join, because to be age and have to the point where you're going to have mobility challenges and make it harder to get around. That's a good thing, honestly. So Wayde, you came to this in a little different way. I know that you were not 14 when you became disabled. This happened later on in your life. So I would like you to introduce yourself, and then also if you could talk about kind of your journey and how you deal with inaccessibility daily, because I think it's a little bit different than the experience Eman had.
Thank you, and Eman, I'm so touched to hear your story. I haven't heard it before. I actually was diagnosed with my eye disease. I have an inherited retinal disease, and I was diagnosed when I was in my teens. It is progressive over my life, and so over the last 15 or 20 years, my sight has gotten to be a real limitation for me. But prior to that, I got college degrees, I taught, I did cancer research for a while. I met my wonderful wife, and she and I started a business together, which continues to this very day. But just this year, we had the opportunity to join and become donors with the trust, and we're very excited about that. And this evening is a real introduction for me as well. We are, I think, very interested in accessibility issues, and among other things. And we hope to become more involved as we learn more about the trust and some of the things that are available for us to be helpful with. I guess I would say at this point in my life, career, I'd like to think of myself as an accessibility advocate. And as such, being part of the trust is one part of it. Bonnie and I are also on a board of a museum where I am the squeaky wheel about accessibility.
Yes, you love squeaky wheels.
And it's not easy sometimes to speak up about things that you're not sure what kind of reception you're going to get, but I've become a little more confident about doing that, and I encourage all of you to do the same as much as you can. And that's one of the reasons that I'm here this evening. As far as day-to-day life experience, mobility is probably the most difficult thing. Just getting around, navigating, mobility training. I saw one of the interpreters here tonight has a dog, and I don't, but that may happen one day.
I know some very good organizations that I could help you out.
Yes. But technology is also coming along in some of these things, which is very interesting as well. One of the areas that I am very interested in trying to be helpful in is the technology that would be associated with audio description, particularly in cultural, but not just cultural institutions. Just making things more accessible for people with low vision or blindness. And as Eman said, if it's helpful for disabled people, it makes it better for everyone. I don't know how many of you are aware, but these streaming services, Netflix and Apple Plus, all of their productions, when they are created in-house, are audio described from the get-go, and rather than being layered on after the fact. And that makes a tremendous difference for me. Certainly, my poor wife used to have to try to explain to me what was going on. And that was challenging because she was always 2 steps behind what was happening on the screen. So those are some of the things. I'm sure I've missed something, but that would be part of my story.
We can circle back if we missed anything. Thank you, Wayde.
Yes.
So Darcy, we're not here just to talk about disability, because we know that there are 1.2 million older adults in New York City, and not all of them are disabled. Some are incredibly vicarious and going out and running marathons, doing all sorts of, not saying that someone with a disability can't run a marathon, but there are overlaps with communities, but there are also unique challenges that each community faces. So can you talk about some of the challenges that older adults specifically face?
Yeah, older adults, they're not a monolith, right? Like you said,
exactly.
Some folks are running marathons, other folks are needing round-the-clock care in nursing homes. I spent a decade in long-term care, assisted living facilities, and senior living facilities before joining SAGE, my most recent posting, supporting LGBTQ plus older adults. And each of us, it needs to be looked at as a unique individual. But again, like Eman and Wayde are saying, accessibility is for everyone. I think about, we have in SAGE have access for those who use and need sign language interpretation. We have language tools, right, for all sorts of languages. Taishanese, never heard of it before. It's a small village in Shanghai, just in the kind of the Shanghai area of China, and we have a participant, 75-year-old woman, immigrated from that small village and speaks a very specific dialect of Chinese. She deserves the same access and rights to fresh food, affordable health care and housing, and access in her community as anybody else. And so we were able to find and locate those things that can support her as an older adult. But also, very similarly, there's an intersection with ageism and ableism. Because if you live long enough, and we all hope that we live long enough, I hope I get to see the hundreds, as the trust has, and hit my centennial. And if you do, the likelihood of having more and more disabilities is likely. 65 and up, you start to see higher incidences of Alzheimer's and dementia. It's almost guaranteed if you're 90 and older that you will have some instance of dementia in your lifetime. And so having those accessibilities, but even thinking about short-term situations. We have patients who have concussions from falls, right? If you're dealing with a person who has a concussion, the number one thing they tell you is to give your brain a rest. So how do you give your brain a rest? You don't look at the TV, you don't look at the phone, and so those audio description services are really helpful for someone who may have suffered from a concussion, even a short-term sort of disability for aging, whether you're 100 years old with a concussion or 14 years old with a concussion. And so I think it's really important to think about the kind of cross-sections and the intersections of the two and how we can support each other. And I will say, I 100% agree with Wayde and Eman. There is nothing wrong with being the squeaky wheel. The squeaky wheel doesn't just get the grease. The squeaky wheel helps everybody because then the cart runs correct.
Thank you. Yes. I think everyone at the Trust can attest that I'm very squeaky. My husband, too. One thing that is actually on the horizon that you just brought up reminded me when you were speaking is about a kind of specific community within disability, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. They historically have been institutionalized, so you think about Willowbrook, and this is the first generation of people with intellectual disabilities that are living in the community, and now the senior serving organizations are scrambling to figure out how do we serve them, and then also the disability service organizations, well, how do we serve seniors now? So I've been having a lot of conversations with groups, both mainstream providers and the disability service providers thinking about, okay, how can we, make sure that we're serving these communities who also have the intersectionality of language and race and culture and all the things, kind of the specificities that they need in terms of their services. So it's a really interesting time, I'd say, in the disability and aging service world. So Eman, now turning back to you. I love nonprofits. I've worked in nonprofit my entire career. So can you speak to the work of nonprofits? And you've worked for a couple. You have a lot of experience with NILPI, who partners with many organizations. What have they helped to achieve, and kind of what's on the horizon? What do you see next?
Oh gosh, I mean, I see all kinds of things with the work. I mean, I've been at NILPI coming up on 8 years. And the work that we've been doing there has grown so much over time, from making transportation more accessible, to making schools and hospitals more accessible, to getting people who may be undocumented health care that they need, to doing some actual great work around not only environmental justice but disability justice. I mean, y'all were here when we had a few wild storms earlier this year, and oftentimes in the outer boroughs, especially Brooklyn and in Queens, I was born and raised in Queens, so I love Queens. The folks got left, and they had flooding, and it was so much flooding going on that mold was growing, and then they had lung issues. And I'm just like, oh gosh, now it is not only it's an environmental justice issue, this is absolutely a disability justice issue. How can we help them? How can we come in and fix? So we're working with elected officials to work on that. But I feel like also there's some organizations, I would say, like outside of NILPI, are still want to, they kind of shy away from disability because they're like, oh, somebody else is doing it.
Yep.
Or we don't have anyone here with a disability. It's like, okay, it doesn't matter if you don't have anyone there.
They do. They do.
Oh no, they totally do.
They do.
So I just started my own organization, Diversity Includes Disability, to do training for organizations and also train people on disability leadership and then do art stuff. And I've been training a lot of the organizations, and I always do discovery calls with them. And I can say this with full certainty, 100% of the time. They're always like, we don't have anyone here with a disability. And then I come in and do the training. Yeah. And because the way I do the training with storytelling and sharing videos and open dialogue with folks, come to find out, they have several people there with a disability. And they didn't feel comfortable enough to talk about it because they didn't feel safe. And as soon as I came in and made myself vulnerable and said, hey, I will share some deep, dark stuff that's gone on with my health and my body, that's when they share. And so if you help people to be comfortable, and it's not like, whenever I say stuff like that, people are like, oh, here man goes with her woo-woo. But for real, when someone is actually engaged with you, when someone's showing some empathy and compassion towards you, aren't you more likely to be open and share yourself?
Yeah.
The same thing goes with people in nonprofits. I've been working in nonprofits for 26 whole years. Yes, 26 whole years. And I've seen so many people think that if they share themselves, that it sometimes makes them, makes them weird or makes them uncomfortable. But I'm good at the work that I do because I'm authentic with folks. I share myself all the time. And because I share myself all the time, people will also share themselves with me. And also share, what their dreams are, what their goals are, what they want to do in work, what they want to do with life. The Ford Foundation came out with a great article a few years ago, and I met with them a couple times, and I was like, oh, I'm actually right. And the article said, because I was stunned. I was like, the Ford Foundation is saying the same thing I've been doing my whole life? Okay, that's awesome. What it said was, when you share personal stories, you not only pull at people's heartstrings, but you also pull at their pocketbooks.
That's true.
And when I've shared that with so many people, and some people don't like my approach. But guess what? My approach works. It's just because I'm a little rough around the edges. That's okay. But my approach works. Why? Because I share my stories, I pull at people's heartstrings, and then I pull at their pocketbooks. And there you go. And so I wish more nonprofits.
Work for our fundraising team?
I mean, y'all hiring? No, but and I think that some people don't, they think it's like, it's got to be all like, cookie cutter and fit into a box and be all like, oh, step A through Z, it's got to be this way and that way. Like, I think nonprofits can be incredibly fluid and incredibly flexible because we are creating in some communities, we're creating whole new worlds for people that have never experienced equity in their life. Mm-hmm. So if you're creating a whole new space of equity for a community that's historically been ignored abandoned, neglected, abused, that means something in the world. And I feel like if we're vibrating that out to create more equity and create more inclusion for communities that have been ignored, I feel like that's a good check on your karma list. You know what I mean? Like that means that you're doing something right in the world. And if you're not doing enough of that, I can send you some places so that you can do some more of that, because it's so necessary. And I remember a couple of days ago, my husband, he's in the audience. Hey, Will. He said, we were having, I can't remember the full conversation, but he was like, you know, you don't even fit in any boxes. I was like, no, what's a box to me? I'm more of like an octagon, weird star shape. But people keep trying to fit me in a little square or a little circle. And I'm never going to fit y'all. That's it. So don't try to fit into these little boxes. Create your own shape. Create your own equity, your own inclusion. And then you'll find out that people do want to join your new community with your new shape because they like it, because they want to feel that free. And if we're not about us being as free as we can, what are we here for, you know? I know that was such a rant. Sorry.
No, thank you. And I gotta say, just on the group say, oh, we don't do disability. You know how many times as a funder we're getting other funders to sit at the table and they're like, oh no, we don't support disability. But it's like, okay, well, if you support social services, if you support employment, if you support workforce development, if you support education, you're supporting people with disabilities.
Absolutely.
But they may not be self-reporting.
Absolutely.
So just turning the table, Wayde, you talked a little bit about, you're new to the trust. So you are not lying down. You're thinking about kind of next steps in your career and what you're thinking to do next. How do you plan to put your charitable dollars to work in disability and more broadly? What do you envision for yourself going forward?
Well, that's part of the reason that we came to the trust, was because my wife and I were talking about it, and we have this broad idea that we would like to be helpful. But as we learned more about the trust and how the trust can help us learn enough so that we can focus our interests, we may not have a great deal of money to be available, but if we put it in the right place, it can make a good impact, and that was one of the very appealing things about the trust to us. So as far as what we want to do going forward, I mentioned accessibility. That's certainly why I'm here this evening. And we've already had some conversations. Julia Chang has been already very helpful with us, giving us some information about a project that, in fact, is underway here at the Museum of the Moving Image.
Yeah.
So we're very excited about that. Part of the accessibility experience for me that I want to just touch on, I guess, is you know, as we get older, one of the things that happens is we lose independence. Maybe we can't walk as well, or we can't see or hear as well. And this is common to anyone with a disability. So older people you're gonna lose that independence, and adjusting to losing that independence is one of the things that I want to try to find an outlet for and a way to be helpful with.
And you did also talk about employment a little bit, right?
I did.
Not just, what's the word, like...
Entry level?
Entry level, thank
Yes.
you. I think of the word entry level employment, but really thinking
So
about
one of the other things that, since I've become blind and become part of the blind and low vision community, there are a number of organizations out there that provide services and are helpful. But one of the things that we've noticed, and you mentioned it in your what you said earlier, nothing about us without us. So there are organizations that serve the blind and low vision, but none of the executive level are blind or low vision. And you know, those of us who have that experience, I have executive experience, I can be helpful on that level. But oftentimes when those jobs are being filled, people with blind or low vision in those organizations are not being considered. And I think that that's a really mistake. And I think that needs to change.
Of course it needs to change. And the unemployment rate for people with disabilities is 70%.
Yes.
And that's not even people, that's considering people who are still looking for work.
Yes.
That's not considering the people who have given up. So when we're talking about employment, it's not just employment in disability serving organizations, having conversations about making sure that people are on boards of mainstream organizations and that they ensure that their board members are representative of people with disabilities. It's really important. So thank you so much for that. So just kind of wrapping it up now, thinking about kind of hope and your vision for older adults and people with disabilities in New York City. And I'll say what mine is. As I said, I am a fourth generation New York City resident. My grandparents aged in New York City, and it was a very challenging experience for them, really, despite the fact that they were in unions, they had savings, they had, you know, access. Really, really challenging experience, and a challenging experience as a caregiver to manage that, despite the fact that I have a degree in health policy. Even that couldn't manage it. So I want to stay in New York City, and I want to make sure that when I'm here, I'm able to age gracefully and with dignity and in a way that I feel I want, like the way I want. And hopefully my grant making can set that up for me. Not doing anything for my own personal gain.
The Rachel Grant.
The Rachel Grant. Yes. No, we don't do that at the trust. So, Eman, if you want to start, like, what is your vision for the future, and kind of how, what needs to happen to get there?
Oh gosh, I mean, we need to make this city much more accessible. There's a lot of folks in City Hall who are like, oh, it's the most accessible city in the world. It is not. Japan's actually more accessible. Europe is more accessible. The Netherlands are more accessible. We are actually way down on the list of accessibility in terms of our sidewalks, in terms of our hospitals, our schools, our subway system, our buses, our everything. So thinking about everything from a lens of make it accessible for everyone would be my number one wish, but also making sure that people can age in place and have dignity and care as they're aging. I know when I was both 25 and 30, I had to stay in nursing homes, and that was a nightmare. I was in a real fancy one in Queens and a not so fancy one in Brooklyn, and they were both real awful. So you want to know some more, I'll tell you some on the side. Because they were terrible. And it showed me that they weren't interested in my care or the care of the other residents. All they were interested in was our insurance money and getting our SSDI checks. And I'm like, well, wait, what about my care? What about me reintegrating into the community? They weren't interested in that either, and I had to do all that footwork by myself. I'm not a social worker, but I became one real fast to get out of there because I needed those skills to actually do that. And it was wild to try to reintegrate and do everything on my own, and it shouldn't be that way. It really shouldn't be that way. So making sure that people have the support systems that they need, so accessibility, making sure people have the support systems that they need, but also, getting a lot of these organizations and businesses the training and the information that they need. I think that so many organizations and businesses don't even want to try to hire anyone with any disability because they think it's too difficult, too hard, it's going to be too much labor for them, emotional labor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not difficult. It's not hard. And we know our bodies. We know ourselves. And so we can show up and be there. And I feel like some organizations and city officials just want to throw people into jobs. But you can't just throw people into jobs because you're setting people up to fail. And I've seen so many folks with disabilities get jobs, and they're not there very long because nobody in the office was trained. Nobody in the office had language to deal with them or interact with them or treat them like a human being. And so if we all just meet each other where we're at, I think oftentimes folks just want you to come all the way onto their side. No, don't do that. Meet people where they're at. Meet in the middle, because that's how you build community. You listen. You actively listen. You make sure that you're meeting people's needs, because if you meet someone's needs, they will then in turn meet yours. It's a give and take. Mm-hmm. It's transactional, even if there's no money involved. If you give, they will take. If you take, they will give. Simple as that. And I feel like some people don't even want to go through that with anyone with a disability. I have so many people just looking at my legs, and they'll talk to the person who's with me. Or they won't even talk to me at all. Or they won't talk to and it's like, wait a minute, did I certainly lose my personhood? And so I've gotten real sassy with folks because I'm like, listen, I'm a whole person. I'm not just metal legs. I'm not just lupus. I'm not all the weird stuff going on in my body. I'm a whole person. And so treat me as such. But that doesn't just go for me, that goes with every person with a disability. So meeting people where they're at, make the city more accessible, train people so that they actually have the information, and so they're not making weird assumptions, and make sure you're doing things from a place of equity. And there's a big difference between equity and equality, y'all. So if you don't know, just make sure you look it up. Because it's true. If you make things equal, it might not work for folks. But if you make it equitable, it will absolutely work for folks. And I think some people really miss that point of making it work for everybody with equity.
Right.
So.
And it's important to do that at the beginning.
Yes,
because that's
yes.
what we've learned. Well, I've learned from a lot of the organizations that are thinking about making accommodations and being more accessible. If you build that all in the beginning, it's going to be a lot easier than trying to walk back and change things.
No,
What
absolutely.
services have started or programs or what have you.
Yeah.
Darcy, what's your vision and how do you think we're going to get there? How can we get there?
I think it starts with looking at organizations and people who are doing the work, and maybe not necessarily organizations that say they can do the work, right?
Yeah.
So you think about these large juggernaut organizations that get a lot of the funding, and the great thing about the trust is the trust gives funding to smaller organizations to say, we're going to help you figure out how to, here it's, my previous role at Sage, the loneliness factor for older adults, and the trust supporting accessibility for trans and LGBTQ plus older adults. It's so important. But I think the real bright future that New York City needs, and the hope I have, is for equitable and affordable, being a big key word, housing. Housing is the basis for a lot of things for older adults and those living with disabilities. I can tell you, getting calls from 50-year-olds saying, I can't even get down the 2 steps in my apartment to get to doctor. The only time I leave my apartment is for doctor's appointments. I can't get my wheelchair into my kitchen because I'm in unaffordable, affordable housing. We've had people, our tenants in Stonewall House, we have a LGBTQ plus affordable housing unit in Brooklyn, and they lived here in Queens. And they moved to Stonewall House, but they come here to Queens every day because Queens is home.
Yeah.
And so affordable housing where people can stay and be who they've been their whole lives. Because I started volunteering in nursing homes at the age of 12. And, forgive me, as an administrator and an executive now, I wouldn't do that. But my mother worked for some really great administrators who let me come in the door. I grew up with a physical therapist as a mom, and my wife was a physical therapist for many years. And you get to know older adults as people. We think about our grandparents, right? You don't know your grandparent as sweetie, as honey, as that kind of infantilization of someone with a disability or as an older adult. And I think that's so key. And that's what I did in nonprofit nursing homes. And that's my hope for our older adults in New York City, is that we start to see them as people and meet them where they are. And that starts with accessibility for everyone.
Yes, thank you. And just to put a plug, because they're right down the street, Fair Housing Justice Center is an organization that is pushing around accessible housing, and they have a fund that is available to make accommodations to housing for people with disabilities. So check them out if
They
you
do
don't know
great
them
work.
already. They're great. Wayde, bring us home. What is your vision, and how do we get there? I know you.
Perfect word, yes. Thank you very much.
Oh, God, my God.
Oh, it's so cute.
Oh, even funders can flub it up sometimes, right?
Don't be sensitive. My vision. Yeah, where do we go from here, right?
The blooper reel there.
It's being formed. I'll put it that way.
Okay.
I completely agree with affordable housing, and if people have a home, then they can build a life. They can get a job. They can they can put down roots. They can have friends and family. Housing is so important. It's a very big topic and a very expensive one. It needs government, I'm afraid, and other large funders in order to make it really happen. But it is a very, very important thing. Certainly homelessness and disability and aging that are going on now would be much better served by having better housing available. For me, I am more interested, I have to say, personally, because of my vision, in blind and low vision causes and support. So those are the kinds of things I'm going to find and try to be helpful with. I did say a minute ago about independence. I really feel that that's an important factor. And it spans age groups, it spans ethnicities. I think looking at things and making the world more livable and more make it so people can be more independent in their lives is something that I really want to try to pursue.
Thank you. And I'm excited to work with you. Despite the Trust being one of the biggest funders of disability in New York City, it's a drop in the bucket compared to what the need is. So it's really exciting to have new donors that are willing to help. So thank you, Wayde. So now I'm going to introduce my colleague, Victor Calisi, to the stage. Thank you. Hey, Victor. How are you? So, a native New Yorker, Victor Calisi is an internationally recognized diversity inclusion champion. He was a member of the first U.S. national sled hockey team and represented his country at the 1998 Paralympic Games in Nagano, Japan. Victor spent more than 2 decades in public service. His culminating role from 2012 to 2022 was as commissioner of the New York City Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities under 3 different administrations. Congratulations. He is now the Director of Accessibility and Excellence at Walmart. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Rachel. Well, exciting to be here. What a great panel. Eman, Darcy, and Wayde. It's just listening to meet people where they're at, really combating loneliness and really independence. And that's what disability is all about, right? Just putting it together, making sure that we have the independence to do what we want. And nothing speaks more to that than the power of philanthropy. I have seen the power of philanthropy change lives, fund government programs, from employment to people with disabilities. We're getting real jobs with real pay and real benefits. Looking at the way that people with disabilities can gain their independence. I was just talking to Viscardi and how the trust funded programs for people to be able to be social in their lives. And the trust has built so many great programs, and you heard them. They're the biggest funder of people with disabilities. And I'm so honored to be part of the trust now because I opened up the Calisi Family Fund to be able to drive what I want to support for people with disabilities across the disability field, looking at those people who are neurodiverse and the people with disabilities in wheelchairs and blind and low vision and deaf and hard of hearing, because I want to make that impact. The trust is an amazing place. Help us get people with disabilities the independence and things that they need in their lives, and be part of this initiative to drive people with disabilities to get what they want, what they deserve, and how they deserve it. So I just want to say thank you. And so glad to be part of this 100th year birthday. And I guess I'm the last one that stands between everyone and the reception. So
right. Birthday drinks.
Go for drinks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.